Two things. For whatever reason, when you were just talking about whatever, trust came into my, just as a word to talk to you about, like, what is it that I can tangibly trust? I have an intuition, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on what it is that I'm trusting.
Well, earlier when we were talking about, there's doubt, which doesn't feel good, which is not a vibrational match to what your inner being knows. And then there's hoping, which is a little closer. There's less resistance in hope than doubt, but there's still resistance in hope. And then there's belief, which is less resistance than hope, but there's still some resistance in some belief. But knowing, that's when you move into the no resistance zone. And we would call knowing trust. We wouldn't call doubt trust, and we wouldn't call hope trust, and we wouldn't even call belief complete trust. But when you know something, and so what trust really is being, if only for a moment, where your inner being is. When we use the word trust, and when you use the word trust, when most use the word trust, what we all really mean mostly by that word trust is that a sustainable feeling of knowing. But you don't start out with a sustainable feeling of knowing. You start out with a doubtful feeling of knowing, and then a hopeful feeling of knowing, and then a sort of more believing feeling of knowing, and then a knowing feeling of knowing. And so it's degrees, isn't it? But the more you know the existence of your inner being, and the more you know, this is the most wonderful thing about what we get to teach you or to interact with you about. There is not a shred of evidence to the contrary of anything that we speak. So it's not hard to trust it once you allow yourself to meditate and raise your vibration and then receive that guidance. You just have to know. And once you've had enough experience where you do know that, we say to people, start out with easy things. What happens with so many of you is you've got some issue that you want to get to the bottom of, or that you want to resolve. But because it's an issue, you've thought a lot about it. And you've thought a lot about it from your awareness that it isn't what you want. So without even meaning to, you've got all this resistance on this issue, and then you want to start with that issue to gain your trust. Well, that's the last issue you should start with to gain your trust, because it's the hardest issue to start with to regain your trust. You've practiced. The subject of money is a hard one because you've practiced not having enough. Even the issue of love is a hard one because you've used the word when you don't mean it. Don't you know I love you? Or you've heard it from others. And so you got to come to some vibrational awareness of what you mean. What it really comes down to is you are lovers. You love. That's who you are. And anything less than that is not who you are. But you know what's so interesting? Wherever you stand, you often believe you are right. And even if you don't feel love, you still think you're right. So you don't get to that feeling of trust because you think you're right, but you're not in sync with source, so you don't feel love. And so it's not paying off for you because you're missing some important elements. You can't be in hate or anger or frustration or doubt and be practicing trust. You can only be in love and appreciation and positive expectation and fun and lightheartedness, you see. So let's be really accurate about this. This is big. This is why you're reaching for this. Trust comes from what you thought was going to happen happening. Stay tuned. So that means if you're expecting something negative to happen, and it does, don't you say, I knew that was going to happen. So let us redefine trust from our vantage point. We want you to replace trust with alignment. Rather than go for trust, we want you to go for love. We want you to go for clarity. We want you to go for wholeness, because it's really easy to come to expect bad things to happen when bad things have been happening. Jerry used to say, get me once, shame on you. Get me twice, shame on me, because I should have seen it coming. Well, we're not really teaching that, but we get what he meant. When something happens and you're able to make the correlation between what you've been expecting and what comes, a lot of people who are not tuned in, tapped in, turned on, they can't get past your expectation. So your expectation evokes from people. In other words, that's what the law of attraction is. It's attraction, it's attraction, it's attraction. So you get what you think about, which means you come to trust those outcomes. But it's only when you factor in your alignment factor in what you're coming to trust that you really have your ability to deliberately create. Did you follow all of that?
Yes.
If someone always behaves in some way and you just expect them to behave in that way, and every time you're with them they behave in that way, you've come to trust that they're going to behave in that way. So that trust is not the way you want to use it, is it? And yet, isn't it a sort of trust or expectation? So we think trust is nothing more than expectation, and we would replace that word with something that is only rooted in source energy connection. So we'd call it alignment or love. Enough?